Hello and welcome back to the greenhouse. So just a quick video today, well, hopefully. We had a little bit of a disaster in here. We think it was probably a large bird, maybe one or two rooks, had gone into the greenhouse. Normally we leave the door closed or almost closed, and that's to keep the local cats out, but maybe the door was left open, or they can of course get in through the roof vents, which are automatic, and they can fly in through there. But whatever happened, something had gotten into the greenhouse and created complete mayhem. All the rubbish that we've got piled up on the shelves here, old pots and bottles and tins of twine, all of that stuff was knocked down into the old chilli plants here, and the plants nearest the door, they got pretty badly smashed up. All the top stems were broken. The basil plant got completely wrecked, and then a couple of our larger fruited peppers down the middle, their branches got snapped as well. It's not a disaster, but it is a little bit annoying. Apart from that, everything is going reasonably well, and the tomatoes are ripening, quite a few of them now. And what I wanted to do was just compare a couple of plants, because this year I'm growing in pots and it's the first time for a very long time. I've had the pleasure of growing in the ground for some years, and if you have that opportunity, to my mind, that's the best option. If you've got the opportunity to plant directly into good, rich soil, that's going to give, I think, the best growth for the tomato plants. A tomato plant has potentially a very extensive root system. It's really surprising how far those roots can grow under the right conditions. You give them the space for that root system to develop, you're going to get stems like tree trunks, and those plants, very vigorous, nice and healthy. They can then carry a big crop, which is what we want. In pots, of course, you're restricting that root system, and here I'm actually using fairly small pots. Now, I have seen tomatoes grown somewhat successfully. I mean, they fruit in very small pots. Of course, you need to water a lot, and you also need to feed a lot. I'm not that great at the watering, and on a hot day, if I can only get up to the greenhouse once, it's not great if those pots are drying out and the plants are suffering. Particularly prone to blossom end rot and things like that if the watering is a little bit irregular, or they're running a bit dry. So that's not ideal. A bigger pot can hold a bigger volume of water, of course, and that's going to reduce that problem a bit. I also don't like to feed too much. These plants, I think, have had three feeds, possibly four, of a fairly mild seaweed-based organic fertilizer. Not much more than that. Now, they're growing fine. I'm perfectly happy with them, and I think for pot-grown plants, they're doing pretty well. I'm a little bit surprised at how robust they are and how well they're doing, actually. But I think that is due to the compost mix. And I suspect that when I last grew plants in containers, I was probably using a pretty poor compost mix. Of course, as you get older and you do this for a while, you learn a few things about what works well and what doesn't. And I dare say if I went back in time and saw what I was doing, what I was putting in those pots, I'd probably want to kick myself. To my mind, an off-the-shelf multi-purpose compost, or even worse, to be honest, a grow bag, I don't think the stuff in that is up to much. But if you take some of that multi-purpose compost and you mix in some horse compost, something like that, or some homemade compost, you add some fish blood and bone, and you get the texture right, you get plenty of organic matter in there, that compost is going to sustain those plants a heck of a lot better than some rough old stuff straight out of the bag. And that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been doing for years now, especially with the peppers and chilies. But now I'm back to having to grow tomatoes in pots. I think they're doing fairly well. And I just want to compare two of them here because I've got different pot sizes. Now, these are just pots that I happen to bring with me from a previous garden. So I haven't bought these especially for this. Most of the tomatoes are in 15-litre pots. I've got to be honest, I expected that to be far too small to get decent plants. I was wrong. The plants in those 15-litre pots are absolutely fine. I'm perfectly happy with them. The question is whether the plants in the larger pot, I'm not sure what it is, 25, probably 30 litres, something like that. But it's a lot bigger than the 15-litre pots. The question is whether those plants are doing substantially better. I don't think they are. I think there may be a small difference in the vigour of the plants. Now, I've got 5 examples in the larger pots and the rest are all in the smaller pots. There's possibly a difference in the vigour of the plant, the stature of it, but it's not consistent. So some of those in the small pots have done really well. There may be a tiny difference in the fruit size, but again, it's not by a huge amount and it's not that consistent. So I'm not doing a scientific experiment here. I'm not measuring the weight of the vegetation. I'm not weighing the crop. So I can't make a sound judgment really as to the amount of vegetative growth that has been put on and the amount of fruit that's being produced. I can just eyeball it and get an impression as to whether there's a big difference between these pot sizes, and I'm not convinced there's a huge difference. I think what makes the biggest difference is putting something of decent quality in the pot at the start of the season. I think that's the most important thing there is. Good, fertile soil, something with some life in it, and then some slow release nutrition, which I'm getting from the fish, blood and bone. That takes many weeks to break down. And I think that's what's working well for me. And I don't know what we're going to do next year, of course. But what I'm not going to do is go out and buy a whole load of, say, 40-litre pots. They're not necessary. The biggest I would think about getting is 25 to 30 litres. And actually, I've got tons of these 15-litre pots, and I'm quite happy to grow the tomatoes in those. And that was not what I expected to find. So let's take a look at a couple of plants, 2 neighbouring plants. They're the same variety. They're sat next to each other. The conditions are pretty much the same. They're in the same tray underneath. I've got trays underneath the pots so that the water that drains through, it's quite a well draining mix. I don't like anything that sits there too soggy because it's really bad for either root development early on, the roots won't grow into soggy soil, or it's really bad later for the plants to sit in soggy soil because the roots will decay. So I like a nice free draining compost, but those trays underneath, when you water, the water will seep through the compost, of course, but it can be slowly drawn back up bit by bit so that the plants don't dry out. Now, you've got to be careful not to have them sat flooded in a tray of water. That's not good either, but it does help with the watering, especially if you're only watering once a day. I mean, on a dull day like today, we might even get away without doing it if we're really tight for time. But they're in the same tray. They probably had a similar sort of amount of water. Obviously, one pot is a lot bigger than the other, but I think the results are fairly similar. Let's take a look. Now, it's rather crowded in the greenhouse, so it's a little tricky getting the camera in the right spot to do any filming, but here we've got Pantano. I mean, it's an old variety, but it's a fairly good performer. This one here, not uniformly red yet, but this is ready to take. And that's why I wanted to shoot the video today before I remove that fruit. These are nice fruit because it's an old sort. They're a little bit variable. This is a very odd shaped one. These others are fairly typical. Now that's not a bad size for Pantano. They're not overly large, and these at the back here, I'm hoping they get a little bit bigger. They might not actually. Those are small specimens, but these larger ones, they're a decent size for this variety, even though they're in pots. If anything, it can produce larger fruit than that, but only under really ideal circumstances. The stem diameter here, I think this is pretty good. This is a thick stem. I have had them in the past. I remember when growing in pots where the stems were rather weedy. So if I can get the camera in closer, take a look. That's about a thumb width stem well on my chunky digits. I reckon that's pretty robust for a pot grown plant. Now this one is in the larger pot. The one next door is in the smaller pot. So this one's got a weird truss of fruit hanging off the side, and today I will give this some support because this is a lot of weight to be hanging on the side. This is just from a side shoot, and it grew long enough to set some fruit before I pinched it out, and so I kept these fruits here. So these are extras, and well, I think they're pretty good. These fruit, they're a little bit smaller, I think, than the largest on that other bunch. Not a huge amount in it. The other bunch also had some smaller fruit, but not bad at all. If I get in here, there's some more off of this truss. Now these are very small fruits, they're a bit silly. I could just remove them, but they're not causing any harm. Down the bottom though, there's an absolute beauty. I have, as you can see, snipped a couple off here already, and they are mighty tasty. But this is a cracking fruit. That's a really good size. I think perhaps that's the largest one we've got. So it doesn't seem to be much of a problem with fruit size on these, in these smaller pots. Oh, that's not nice. I can see a little bit of slime on this. We have a slug or a snail wandering around here, so I'll have to find that critter. This fruit is definitely ripe. That needs to come off. The stem size, not bad. If I look a bit further up, about the same height I looked on the other one. Well, it's a little bit smaller, I think, than the other. Not by a huge amount, but I think, yeah, it is a little bit smaller. Got a couple more small pots of these in the corner. This is not the largest fruit, but it's a decent size. This will not be far from ripe. Smaller fruit on this one, but that's a good sized tomato. Again, we've got a bit of slime here, so there is definitely a marauding slug or snail somewhere having a munch on these old leaves. That I don't want. On a different variety here, I've got black cherry. You can see I've taken some of these fruit already. This is a lovely tomato, a delightful cherry tomato. I mean, it's a bit larger than a lot of the cherry tomatoes. It is quite a handy size, really. Very delicious. Now, black cherry's been around for quite some time, and I know seems to be a bit of a trend for funky coloured tomatoes. Even though it's called black cherry, you can see this is not a black tomato. This is ripe. This is dead ripe, this one here. It's not going to get any darker than that. It's just this sort of moody, rusty brown colour, and that's as dark as this one will get. But these sorts of coloured tomatoes have a very rich, delightful flavour. I'm very fond of these. But again, this is one in one of the large pots, decent size stem here. It's quite a robust plant. But in the small pot next door, I've got nice fruit here, similar sort of size, maybe not quite as large, but the stem is pretty much as large as in the bigger pot. Maybe there's a small difference here, small difference in the fruit size, maybe just slightly less vigorous stem, but there's not a huge amount in it. Well, we're having a funny sort of day here today. 1 minute it's overcast, some very moody looking clouds. Then the next minute it's clear blue sky, blazing hot, and there's a fierce old wind kicking up. So I hope there's not too much howling wind on the video today. But anyway, that's my very unscientific comparison of those plants in the different pot sizes. And I'm not convinced that there's a huge difference or a huge improvement, let's say, in moving up to the larger pot size. I think it's possible that let's say the average fruit size might be better, just a little bit, in the larger pots, but it's definitely not clear. Some of the largest fruit in Pantano, that is on the smaller size pots. On the black cherry, the larger pot, it does have the larger fruit. Does it matter? Not a huge amount in that, and maybe that's just random. Maybe that pot had the better plant in it. It's very hard to take, and unless you do a proper scientific experiment, lots of plants grown in the same conditions, and then you're weighing all the fruit that comes off of it, you're measuring the sizes, and you're measuring the stem diameters and all the top growth. Well, I'm not doing any of that, so it's just a case of getting a feel for it and allowing that to inform our decisions next year as to what pots to use. So if you have a look online, a lot of the advice seems to be to grow tomatoes in pretty big pots, 30 litres and more. Now, this is going to sound weird coming from me because I'm a big advocate for getting them in the ground in deep, rich, fertile soil. Obviously, if your soil conditions are bad, they may do better in a pot than in the ground. But assuming you've got well-prepared soil with a nice texture and it's full of life, I still prefer to put the plants in the soil. In the pots, I expect to find the bigger pot providing quite substantial advantages. It's not what I found, and to be perfectly honest, I will be quite happy to grow in the 15 litre pots next year. It may be that we put some of the larger fruited sorts in the bigger pots and the smaller fruited sorts in the small pots, something like that. I don't know. I mean, we have these pots, so we might as well use them. But I don't really see a problem with growing in the 15 litre pots, and that's not quite what I expected to find. I think it's possible that it's more to do with what you're growing in, that medium. And if you put some decent soil in there, a compost blend that's got lots of nutrient, I don't mean lots of synthetic feed, but a nice rich soil. We've got that horse compost in there, and we've got some fish blood and bone, and the plants seem to love that. Now that sort of blend is something I've been using for many years anytime I'm potting something up. If you go back through any of the videos, I think pretty much if I'm throwing something in a pot, I'm not using compost straight out of a bag. Now you can do that if you like, but I find that the texture's not right, and I don't think it's a sufficiently rich medium to support the sort of growth we need from these tomatoes. That's just my opinion. Of course, opinions vary, But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how these plants have done in the 15 litre pots. And I'd be interested to hear, of course, about your own experience if you've grown in pots. But I think that the soil makes all the difference. And as I said, I've only fed these, I think 3 times. It might have been 4, and I'm not doing it regularly. And to be honest, they don't need a lot. I did have some kind of nutrition issue with the 3 pots at the back, and that appears to be fixed. That was I think a magnesium deficiency, easily fixed with Epsom salts. I did 1 foliar feed and a little scattering on the top of the soil. That was enough to deal with that. Otherwise, they look perfectly healthy. There's just one more thing I want to do today, and that is to tidy up some of these peppers. Now, this lovely compost mix we made up, it's full of weeds. We've had nettles and I think chickweed and all sorts of stuff growing in that. It's very annoying. When you buy bagged compost, you don't want it to be full of weed. You hope that it's been processed at the sort of temperatures required to kill off the weed seeds. Has it heck? There's weeds everywhere. Grass, of course, and all sorts of stuff. So I want to get in there and snip some of those out. Annoyingly, a lot of them are growing up the back of the pots and I can't get to them. So I'm going to tidy up around the base of the chilli plants. Now, on a previous video, one of my regular viewers, and I am of course immensely grateful to those that watch regularly and leave comments, one of my regulars asked whether I tidy up the leaves around the bottom of the pepper plants, the small fruited chilies and peppers here, like I did with the tomatoes. Now I removed the, I don't know, half a dozen sets of leaves from the bottom of the tomato plants. It improves the airflow, exposes those fruits to the sun. It's generally pretty good for the health of the tomato plant to do that. Not to remove too much, but the old tired leaves down the bottom, they're not contributing a lot and they're kind of getting in the way. So I did that, and this viewer asked whether I do something similar with the peppers. And the truth is, I've never done that. Now, some peppers I prune to just 2 stems, and those, of course, I'm always removing side shoots and stuff. I'm just keeping 2 stems, but these others, which I allow to pretty much run riot, I don't tidy those up at all. But I'm going to this time because it's pretty crowded in there and it will help with airflow. It will also allow me to get to the back of those pots and snip out those pesky weeds. Let's just take a quick look. So it's a bit of a jungle in here, and okay, I've got this side shoot, but it's growing out. It's not going to be particularly productive. I can remove that, and I can remove some of these big old leaves here. There's so much growth on the top. They're not really going to miss them, and that's going to improve the airflow here, and it's also going to let me get to the weeds that are growing in the pots at the back so that I can deal with them. Maybe I can get in there with the snips, just snip that out. These leaves, I can pull those off. You don't really need anything growing below the first junction on the plant. So the stem is split here, then it's split again. You can remove anything below this point. Sometimes you can leave some of the side shoots and they will develop, but on these plants they're not really doing a lot. So I can remove all of this junk. That will tidy things up. There's a nice nettle growing away. Here you can still see some of the damage caused by the bird. This stem's been snapped. That's why this pepper is at a funny angle. I think a fat bird has sat in it. These peppers are, I think these are nearly ready actually. Some of them on the outer pots are starting to colour up, so there's some grass. But the big weeds are lurking in the back pots. I don't know why that would be the case. maybe we just pulled some of them out of these pots as they were developing. But if I pinch off some of these leaves, pinch off some of that growth. Now that's going to open this up, better airflow, and I can get to those weedy bits at the back. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do to this row. I won't show the whole thing. It's going to take me quite a while to rip through this and then get all the weeds out. But these are nice fruit. I've been waiting for one of these to start to colour, because I don't actually know what the mature size of this particular variety is. This is Samora, and it's a sweet banana type. Now I've grown sweet banana before. Something's had a nibble there. I think that's a slug actually. There's a bit of slime there. I've grown sweet banana many times, but this is a slightly different variety, and I really wasn't sure what the mature size would be. I think it's a rather smaller than sweet banana, which is fine in the greenhouse here. So as soon as I see one start to colour, I will get an idea of when these are actually mature, and then I'll harvest them. Now this is one, you can see it's very pale green. This would often be taken whilst green and fried. It's very tasty. I don't like the fruits that are dark green. I find them bitter, but this one should be very nice, even though it is in its green state. But as soon as I'm confident that we're not going to get larger fruit, I shall start to use these. Well, there's a gap in the clouds, the sun has come out, and it is blazing hot again in here. I'm going to crack on with this job, get it done, then get out of the sun. So that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.